Hey, ladies.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, today we were thinking of talking a little bit about shadow work and shame. Since it's now post Thanksgiving, we're heading towards Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, winter solstice, all the winter end of year celebrations, New Year's. Um, and what's happening seasonally and energetically is that the days are getting shorter, which means there's more darkness than there is light up until we hit the solstice when the light starts to return. Um, and this time of year, at least for me, always feels like a good time to do some soul searching, some shadow work, um, starting to turn inward and address the things that I've been avoiding. Um, so when we talk about shadow work and shame, what comes up for you guys?
I love that idea, Jen, because what the first thing is that comes up for me is a mentor of mine 100 years ago when I was in school um, used to talk about the life cycle, not as like a 2D cycle, but more as like a spiral or a spring.
Mm,
And each time we come around a cycle, we come back to a familiar place, but we understand it from a different depth.
yeah.
And so that's what comes up for me in thinking about that. I've got another year of lived experience, of recovery, of consideration of myself in relation to the world, to understand me and what my needs are, to come back around to a similar place from last year and consider it from a little bit of a deeper, different perspective, I think is what the first thing that comes up for me.
Mhm. I love that. I get that question a lot or not question, but the clients who will express, and me personally have had this thought many times of, didn't I work on that already?
Mhm.
Why is this coming back? Like, why do I have to keep dealing with my mom issue? Like, I
Yeah,
worked on that already.
right.
What about you, Am?
That was really beautiful, Stace. Um, what comes up for me is shadow work is all the things that I had to morph into to survive.
Mm.
And at the time, I didn't necessarily know that they were bad or negative or dark. It was survival. Um, when I'm surviving, I don't know the difference in good, better, best, or good or bad. I'm just surviving, and when I come out of it, I have a lot of shame about what I had to do, or there was no choice. The consequence that happened that allowed me to survive is um, then cast with this dark shadow. Um, there's a lot of gaslighting in that for me, and when I want to find blame other than me. Um, and for me personally, I feel shadow work is the core of trauma. It's the reason that we keep numbing and medicating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think another thing that comes up for me just listening to that, Amber, and that also was beautiful, is kind of the Jungian concept of balance,
Mm.
um, whether it is masculine, feminine, or dark and light, that shadow work can sound like the concept of it can sound intimidating or scary, but the goal of it is never to eliminate the shadow.
Mm.
That we wouldn't be who we are without that, without the contrast and without the perspective. So I think for me, when I started my journey with shadow work, there was a lot for me to work on understanding about the goal of it. And the goal of it is not to get rid of it, uh,
Mhm.
is to embrace and hear and connect and understand. And I think that just resonates for me with what you were saying, Amber.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
same. I the more I do this work, both personally and professionally, the more what you just said, Stacey, is how I come to understand it. That it when I started my recovery journey, it was to get rid of the bad parts. It was to get rid of what I was ashamed of, like eliminate that.
Mhm.
And even like my language around it now is very different. I don't want to get rid of the bad parts. There are no bad parts.
Right.
I want to listen and understand, see, hear, embrace the parts that carry a lot of shame for me that, like you said, are a result of trauma. I was that version of myself because I was surviving.
Mhm.
And another thing that came up for me as you guys were speaking is and I forget who said this, but it was something about like we can't have light without dark, without that contrast. Like if you turn the contrast all the way up on your screen, all you see is black. You turn it all the way down, all you see is what you need, that contrast to be able to appreciate either side. And I think that our society teaches us to be afraid of the dark and
Mhm.
teaches us that there's monsters in the dark. There's things, there's bad things, there's scary things. Don't go in the dark. The dark is evil or whatever word you want to attach to it. And then what happens when we label those parts of ourselves as dark or in the shadow, or automatically my brain goes to that's bad. Um, and what would happen if I'm trying to remember the Brené Brown quote. There's a Brené Brown quote
Mhm.
about shame. Do you know it? Because I'm going to misquote it if I try to do it.
Well, I know a bunch of them. I don't know which one.
Okay. But something about like shame and vulnerability, and
Oh,
in order to
yeah. Shame can't exist in connection and in vulnerability.
Mhm.
Um, it's. I was laughing a little bit too, Jen, because that's where I was going with it as you were
Mhm.
talking. Is the modern version, or probably not. This is an Amberism, but the modern day version of this Jungian psychology that we're talking about is Brene Brown's example of the emotion. Like I can't just numb the bad ones,
Yeah.
right? And so when I'm numbing and medicating, I'm numbing all of them. And I think too, like, I don't know this, but this is another Amberism. We should call this version the Amberism. Um, but I think that this is where rock bottom comes from.
Yeah.
I think that shadow work is the birthplace of rock bottom because, in my opinion, it's how courageous the person is to go as far as their soul will allow them to go.
Mhm.
That's courage to me, and it doesn't matter what I have to morph in or become in order to survive that. It shows the depth of that, like, emotion continuum for me. Like,
Yeah.
one end is radical acceptance or joy, all the way through peace, contentment, anger, rage, um, shame, and so, like, that emotional continuum is based on how much courage we have to go into the darkness.
Mhm.
And the HC's definition of recovery is working towards my truest and highest self while accepting all the versions of me along the way.
Yeah.
So like there's a reason that we do that, and we try to practice this non-dualistic
Mhm.
lens, um, because if I'm all of those things, then I must be bad.
Yeah.
right? There's nothing left of me. But if I can personify and identify the versions of me or the pathology, then what's left is me, and I am,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Mari, so Mandala Assessment Resource Instrument that Stacey and I do. Stage 11, it's essentially night of the soul, which is rock bottom. It's shedding everything, like the picture, because I think in pictures, so the image in my mind is like a hero going on a journey and getting to this point in the journey where they've just lost everything. And their soul is bared and they're just emotional agony. And it's just this kind of like rending that's happening. And it's really, really scary and really, really painful. So courage, absolutely. And when I come out of it, I've got nothing left but me. And if I can walk out of that fire, like I'm rebuilding with, I'm just throwing all the metaphors out there, but like when you smelt metal and all the impurities filter out and you're just left with the purest version of that, of the metal. It's like, in my mind, dark night of the soul, that's what you're left with. And then kind of to your point earlier with the analogy of that spiral stasis, like now I go again and I continue on the next leg of my journey with what's left and I rebuild, and I might make the same mistakes again, and that's okay because I'll get a chance to go around again. Yeah.
Well, it's Shrek and Donkey, the layers of the onion, right?
It is layers of the onion.
You were thinking Shrek and Donkey, and I was thinking Anna in the cave in Frozen 2 when Olaf else.
Well, and I was thinking Encanto when the house, like at the end, where the grandmother has to face her past trauma, and then they go and rebuild the house after the house fell apart. So there's a lot of metaphors.
We have a whole other episode just in Disney movies.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get me started on Encanto and the all of the different family roles that you find.
Oh my god.
That's a whole episode in and of itself.
I was texting I think I was texting Amanda after I saw that for the first time. I'm like, oh my god, family of origin roles.
Absolutely. It's what the whole thing is. I think what, other than Anna in the cave and her dark night of the soul after she thinks she's lost Elsa, what's coming up for me too in listening is the step after that. Step 11 in Mari is transformation. And it is not the creation of something new per se, so much as in the cave, Anna says, do the next right thing. It's coming out of the shed and doing the next thing that is right for me in my recovery path. And having that context and understanding for relationship with myself, I can only do through having the dualism and seeing both sides. And then doing that with myself is what allows me to do it with anyone else, including my partner, my children. That's where my ability to have compassion comes from, and to understand and do any of the relationships that show up in my day-to-day life.
The term get out of my own way also comes up for me. When I'm standing in my own way, when I keep hitting my head against the same block and the same block and the same block, usually it's me blocking myself. And it's usually because I need to deal with parts of me that are holding that shame and still holding on to that trauma, because those are the parts that are like interfering and getting in the way. It's my codependency, it's my perfectionism, it's my sabotage, like self-sabotaging. I'm getting in my own way, and it's because there's still pieces of me that are feeling that shame.
One thing that you guys mentioned earlier, I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off with this, but one thing that you mentioned earlier is fear. And what comes up for me, and I'm going to speak in the I in an attempt not to piss a lot of people off, is when I'm in survival, my perception is very much all or nothing. It's very concrete. It doesn't have a lot of depth to it. And therefore, my perception of the world was very all or nothing, black or white. And the way that that showed up for me through the lens of religion, here we go, brace yourselves, is it's good or it's bad. If I'm a bad girl, I'm going to hell. If I'm a good girl, I'm going to heaven, or whatever you guys that are listening, whatever your version of that is. And I'm not speaking of any specific leader or any specific religion. That's just thematically what shows up through values of that system that guide humans. And what I noticed, when you go back to the I, what I noticed that kept me stuck was fear. Fear of not being the good girl, fear of not doing what I'm supposed to do, fear of knowing damn good and well I am quite the little rebel, Pippi Longstocking, like my inner child, and dropping the F-bomb left and right. But it is so amazing in watching how my recovery showed up for me, because the biggest part of it went from a shit ton of isolation to connection, where I can be afraid, and in my work, in my recovery, in my shadow work, I don't ever have to do it alone. And that's where my perception shifts from really all or nothing, really black or white, good or bad, very conditional, because my little brain didn't know any different. Not about blame and fault, just about facts. And my experience of how I see the world now is so much gray. And speaking to what Stacey was just saying, is what allows me to hold space for people that don't vote like I vote, or people that don't believe what I believe, or people that haven't experienced what I've experienced, or vice versa. They've experienced what I haven't. So fear for me is the thing that keeps us all stuck, but it's also the thing that kept me isolated and kept me really stuck in a perception that wouldn't allow me to do any different. And so looking at it through the lens of spirituality, which is not about specific values, specific morals, it is just about the relationship with me and me, and how I perceive our world, and what's bigger than me could be Mother Nature. That was so vital in my continuum that I described, that Brene Brown emotions continuum, because it was really short at first, and now there's a lot more on there that I can choose and be, and none of them require me to be all or nothing.
Well, and it goes back to the shame dies when we allow for vulnerability and connection.
Mm-hmm.
And my shame for most of my life, as far as I can remember, has kept me isolated.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And my connection is what saved me. Having the courage to allow other people in, and allow other people to bear witness, which was terrifying, has been the thing that saved me. Not like on high saved me, but like,
yeah,
I wouldn't be who I am today and it took a lot of rock bottoms for that to happen, to be ready for that. Yeah. So with all of this, like, deep dark night of the soul, shadow work, whatever you want to call it, comes a need to numb, comes a need to protect myself, comes when I'm not used to feeling vulnerable, or even when I am, as we start to irrigate the wound, that vulnerability dysregulates my nervous system.
Mhm.
And so in the next episode, we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like, what that feels like, and explore, what happens when we start to dig more into this. Thank you for joining me today, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank